Well, hey everyone, welcome back to the Culture of Maker channel. It's great to have you here, whether it's on YouTube or on podcast or, that's pretty much all the options actually. So yeah, welcome. Today I am interviewing Frank Ritchie. Frank is a News Talk ZB radio host on Sundays at 6 here in New Zealand. He's a media chaplain and he runs a church. He's pastor of a church. So yeah, he's a busy man. And today we talk basically around the need for men to talk to other men. So yeah, I think we all acknowledge and we can acknowledge our need for men to talk, and we just talk about that today. It's challenging and it's encouraging, and it'll help us in both our work and our family. So yeah, let's get into it. Hey, so thanks heaps, Frank, for joining me. I really appreciate you being with me on the show.
Oh, it's a pleasure. Thank you so much for asking. It's always an honor when anybody feels like they can entrust their podcast to the voice of somebody else. Oh, it's a risky venture.
Totally, man. But honestly, you come highly recommended by a couple of really good friends of mine. And obviously, I'm actually a big listener to News Talk ZB as well.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Well, sorry for anything I've ever said that might have been a little offensive. I know that my humor and my co-host's humor sometimes can be a little borderline, which people find really interesting since I'm a church minister. So if there's anything that's ever made you go, ooh, I do apologize.
Well, I think most people who hang out with me long enough get the same sort of thing, I think. So I think we'll be okay there. So you're a media chaplain. Start there. I don't even know what that means. What does a media chaplain do?
Yeah, there's a whole lot of media people who don't know what that means either. Back in 2014, I was working for Tier Fund.
Okay.
I'd been working for Tier Fund for a number of years in aid and development, specifically around education, very much in the church environment. Before that, I had worked for Life FM. I'd done talkback on Life FM for about 8 years on Sunday evenings.
Right.
I had done their night show for a couple of years and their drive show for a couple of years. So still very much saw myself as a radio person. And was at Tier Fund, and coming to the point where I felt like what we had hoped I would achieve at Tier Fund, I had done it. And felt a call, a sense of pull back into media. But I'd been ordained as a minister, so going back as a full-time radio announcer didn't quite feel like the right fit. Yeah. So a few of us, myself and a couple of people at Christian Broadcasting Association, were looking around the media landscape and just seeing where we might be able to fit in. What is it that I could offer? What is it that I could do? And we saw a real lack of care in the media industry. When you think about what reporters do, whether people like journalists and reporters or not, when you think about what they do, there's a lot of trauma involved. When you think about the stories that they're telling, like you think about all the horrific stories that we hear. We're hearing those stories because there's a journalist on the scene, witnessing it, experiencing it, and telling it to us. But when we looked around, there was just no care in the industry for those people. And we were familiar with chaplaincy in hospitals, universities, the armed forces, and really liked that proactive friendship model of care. There being someone who's not a counsellor, but is proactive in building relationship, is the friend that you can trust to talk to confidentially and just offload a little. And then if counselling needs to happen, knows how to take you through that process. And so we started up media chaplaincy. So my job effectively is just largely sitting in cafes with media personnel and drinking lots of coffee and chewing the fat about life. And it really came to a head for us in 2019 with the Christchurch shooting. I flew down. The shooting happened on a Friday. I managed to fly into Christchurch on the Saturday morning and spent time with journalists. And then a year later, followed it up with a podcast where I interviewed 6 of the Christchurch journalists who were first on the scene, effectively first responders, and helped them just listen to them, process the whole thing. And our work has kind of taken off since then. So we're the people in the industry who care and who want media personnel to know that we value their work, we love what they do, and we want them to be healthy. And we think part of being healthy is having people that you can trust to talk to and know that you're going to be listened and respected in that conversation. So that's effectively what we do.
It's so powerful, man. I was thinking, I've been talking a little bit actually with a few family members and people about, the issue we have with screens and the lack of connection in the real world, and the lack of community. And actually that's probably quite profound, I'm guessing, this lack of community in our lives, and how most of us guys, I think our partners are better. Maybe our partners have sort of half a dozen people they talk to, but most of us guys, we don't really talk to anybody about stuff anymore.
Yeah, and journalists are well known for doing the story, knocking back the black coffee, and then moving on to the next story. I mean, when we did the podcast the year after the Christchurch shooting, a couple of the people that I interviewed in that said that they had never had a chance to process it with anybody. Wow. We're talking a year later.
Wow.
Now, if you don't process it, those issues are going to come out in some way, shape, or form. And us guys know this really, really well, that when there's stuff going on, if we don't find someone to talk about it with, it will bubble up and it will come out in some way. I remember a few months after the shooting, sitting a bunch of journalists in a room with a counsellor, and I just had a chat with these journalists beforehand, individually, just to find out how their life was going. Someone talked about how they were having heart palpitations, didn't really know where those heart palpitations were coming from. Someone else was suffering from loss of appetite, was talking to their GP about that. Another person was dealing with sleeplessness, didn't really know why, because they all, on the surface, felt fine and felt like they had processed what had happened. And then I got the counsellor in the room with all of them to list the symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder. And he went down the list, and you could see the penny drop for every single person in the room. Wow. So the fact that they hadn't processed, they hadn't talked, was showing itself in other ways. And that goes on for us as guys. It goes on in our relationships with our partner and our family, how we're feeling towards them. It goes on with our sleep, our stress levels, and at work. If we don't find ways to talk about this stuff, the stuff that we're dealing with, no matter how big or small it might feel, it will come out in ways that are often unhealthy.
Okay, so are you saying that, and this will sound a really naive question, but are you saying that actually part of getting better is just the process of talking about things?
Yeah. It can sound really dumb. And sometimes that's not going to be enough, and we might need to explore counselling or various other things. Medication, maybe, if there's really serious stuff going on, there's chemical imbalances. But for a lot of us, just talking about stuff externalizes it. Yeah. It stops it from being this thing that's just festering in our head and our emotions, and it externalizes it. It's a sharing of the burden, per se. And it's amazing how much perspective comes just by sharing something, just by externalizing it and getting it out of our head. But us guys are not great at just sitting across a table and sharing our deepest, darkest. No. We're really generally better if there's an activity going on. So it's fascinating watching, because I sit down with men and women in the media scene. It's fascinating watching how we'll process things differently as men versus women, and how willing someone might be just to share their story over a coffee.
Man, that's quite profound. I think I know that to you this is simple stuff, and I'm just getting my head around it, because I guess a lot of men would jump straight to the medication. They're feeling antidepressants or whatever. I know they're handed out pretty fast. I know a lot of men self-medicate, I guess, with drinking and drugs, and gosh, and the research is pretty clear in New Zealand at the moment. We've got a bit of a pandemic's the wrong word, epidemic, with the amount of drugs being used in New Zealand. And this is all probably just an effort just to try to deal with some of the pain, because we're not talking about stuff,
Yeah, I got to the beginning of this year, if I'm going to be a little vulnerable, I got to the beginning of this year and realized that I was feeling really tired. Yeah. I've led a church through, a small church, but it's still a community of people. I've led a small church through the pandemic. Yeah. I've helped journalists through the pandemic for the last couple of years. And I realized the beginning of this year that I was really tired and feeling quite down and low. And the rhythms that would usually sustain me in life, that would usually help get me through things, just weren't doing the trick. And I remember talking about it to my GP, and I have a spiritual director. So I talked about it to my spiritual director. And it's amazing once I verbalized that and owned it, how much relief there was from doing that. Didn't solve it overnight. And then I took on an activity that just compounded it for a number of months. But talking about it, and owning it and being honest about it made me go, actually, it's okay that I feel like this. This isn't bad. And verbalizing it made it feel and sound a whole lot more understandable. And it helped me realize too that I didn't need to fix the whole thing. There were just maybe one or two things that I could work on, and that just working on those one or two things and not expecting it to be fixed overnight was good enough. Without having to be all macho and try and change everything. Like I remember when I first started realizing that I was really tired, I was like, okay, now I have to work on my sleep. I'll work on my diet. I'll work on my exercise. I'll make sure that I'm hanging out with good people. I just couldn't do all of that. So in the last month, I just went, okay, all I'm going to work on is not snacking at night time. Not getting into the chips and the sandwiches. That's the only thing that I'm going to work on. So I stuck a little calendar for the month on my fridge, and all I'm doing is just crossing off each night where I haven't snacked the night before. And that feels like I'm achieving something. But that came from talking about it first and just owning it with someone else rather than just trying to deal with it all on my own. And
did your GP or whoever did that, was it like a counselling session, or did he just say, hey, you just need to look after yourself better? Or there was some kind of response that made you think, actually, I just need to take responsibility for this little part. I can't do everything, but I can do this. My GP was really gentle. I had the sense that if I felt like I needed it, medication would have been on offer. Okay. And there are some instances where I really think that's needed. So I would encourage people to not run away from that, but also know that it's not the whole answer. My GP was just really gentle, listened, seemed to offer some understanding, which was enough for me in that moment, much like a chaplain. I don't prescribe stuff. I don't tell people what they should or should not do. I just listen. And I think there's something profound in the listening and being heard. So when does listening turn into counselling? What's the difference? It's a really good question. I think a counsellor is more targeted at hearing what the issues are and helping you work through those issues, whereas it's not my job to help you work through those issues. It's my job to hear you, and then if I think that something more serious is needed, then I'll step you on to counselling, but I'm not there to go through a process with you to help you solve those issues. Whereas a counsellor is more likely to come up with a plan that might help you work through some of those issues, identify what the deep-seated issues are, and then work through those things. That's not my job. My job is to be effectively the confidential mate who will have a listen. Yeah. And so what would you say would be some common stuff that, from your experience as a pastor and as a chaplain, that guys need to be talking about more? Yeah, us guys are, like I think about my wife, and I think about the women in my life. They talk about stuff fairly openly. Yeah. Whereas I think we I don't know if it's been conditioned or it's just how we are. I think there's an element of conditioning, having travelled a bit and been around men in some other cultures. I think we have this almost lone wolf element where we feel like we've got to be in charge. We've got to be the provider. We've got to be the strong one. So I think there's some of that cultural conditioning that we need to push against a little so that we don't feel like we have to do all this on our own. There's that classic line, no person is an island. It's true. None of us were meant to do this on our own. Yet I think as guys, we're relatively conditioned to do it on our own. Yeah. And even when we're around our mates, it would take some special friendships to really own up to some of the stuff that we truly struggle with. So I think as guys that there's that loneliness. Yeah. I think loneliness for guys is a significant issue in Aotearoa, New Zealand. And I think we need to continue to gently address that.
And there's all the sense of expectation that goes with the sense of needing to be the provider, the strong one, the one who's able to get it all done. And I think there are cultural narratives in play as well.
Yeah.
I think everybody, not just guys, I think everybody's subject to these. When you think about our advertising culture, there's a message that's being bombarded towards us all the time that says your life is not quite good enough. And it's never going to be good enough. Yep. But good enough is always just over the horizon. So if you buy this product, or you do this course, you have this holiday, or you get this thing, then life is going to be better. But it's always just out there. But at the same time, we also exist in a culture that tells us you're amazing. You can be everything that you want to be. You can do all the things. You are phenomenal. Now, there's an element where that's true, but when you butt it up against the narrative that says life is not quite good enough, then we're set up to feel like failures all of the time. Because we're being told that you can do anything, you can be anything, you are amazing, but life is not quite good enough until you do this and you have this. So we're conditioned to feel like a failure almost all of the time. And until we recognize it, it's almost like the Matrix. Until you see it, it's really hard to deal with that. I think that almost more than anything in our culture is something that most of us need to become more aware of.
I think it's such a powerful insight to men, because we can feel like a failure, eh? Like we know this, we know some of the stuff we struggle with in our heads. Then we go home and we can feel a lack of respect at home as well. We can be offensive and feel it back and feel a lack of respect. So we just instantly feel like a failure. And so then maybe we don't engage, and we certainly don't go out talking about it. In fact, I think, we tend to walk away rather than try to step into it. So yeah, very true, very true. It's very easy to walk around and as a failure, and as if dads are walking around feeling like that, then that's going to be pretty hard for them to create great feeling homes. So that's a bit of a challenge.
Totally. I remember, and this will be a struggle for some people to relate to. I'm a person of faith, and I remember, and this sounds really big, but it's easy enough to relate into daily life. I had an experience in what we call the Holy Land, Palestine, Israel.
Right.
And I was over there for some work with Tear Fund. Because Tear Fund was supporting some Palestinian organizations that were working on youth development, youth leadership development, teaching young Palestinians how to have their voice heard without picking up a gun, without resorting to violence, and working on poverty alleviation as well. And I remember heading over there, and it was just getting there was an experience. I got strip searched in the airport in Hong Kong before I got on the El Al Israel flight to fly into Tel Aviv. And if I was really honest, and I think most people who end up working in some sort of charity or aid and development, I think they have this playing out in their subconscious. And I certainly was playing out for me. I think if you were to examine my subconscious, I thought I could save the world. Right. And so then the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, which is the area that I know best away from home, I've studied its history, its geopolitics, religion. I know that area quite well. I know the conflict quite well. And if you were to dive into my subconscious probably would have said, the only reason this conflict is still going on is because they haven't listened to me. And if they just sat at the table with me, we could probably solve this. Yeah. And then I remember getting there. And up until then, my faith, my sense of worth, everything about me was built on the difference I could see myself making in the world. So how many children could I get sponsored from poor communities? I was dealing with the human trafficking issue at the time, particularly sexual exploitation. How much money could I help raise for that? So then when I get to the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, it'd be like, okay, how can I help reduce this conflict? How can I bring people together? And if I can see that happening, then I'm worth something. And I remember getting there and then spending a couple of weeks largely in Palestinian territory, listening to Palestinians. I spent some time in Israel as well, listening to Israelis, and just got this sense that I couldn't solve this at all, that I was really naive, and that faced with this conflict, I'm actually useless. And I remember sitting in the Church of the Nativity, where tradition holds Jesus was born.
Yeah.
And it's this amazing old church. You literally go up and you smell the stones and you can smell the incense that they've burnt in there for centuries and centuries.
Yeah.
And the pilgrims come in, and the altar is built on top of the cave where supposedly Jesus was born. The pilgrims will come in, make their way under the altar, and they'll kiss the spot where it's supposed to have happened. I'm guessing that wasn't happening during the pandemic, and hopefully it gets cleaned regularly, because I kissed it when I was there. But I was sitting there, and the priests were doing what's called the Liturgy of the Hours. They pray each hour, and the incense was burning. They were praying it in Arabic. You've got all these old icons, and it has that classic window with the light that shines down on the altar, and the incense was wafting through. And I'm like, this is a really holy moment. I'm a really spiritual guy. This should be phenomenal. But I remember sitting there and thinking, I should pray. I should talk to God about this situation. I know that'll sound weird to some people, but I remember sitting there thinking, I've got nothing. I don't know what to pray here. I don't know what to ask for. I don't think I can change anything. And all of a sudden, I lost this expectation on myself. I was sitting there with no expectation that I could do anything. I just felt useless. Had no expectation that God, whatever God is, would change anything in this situation. Didn't lose any belief in God. And I just sat there in complete silence. No sense that in that silence I had to be anybody. And it was really profound. The fact that I'm still a human being. I'm still worth something. As a person of faith, I still believe I'm created in the image of God and I'm loved by God. But here I am, relatively useless. And it doesn't matter. I'm still okay. I'm okay. God's okay. The world's going to keep on turning whether I fix this or not. This is okay. It's okay that I'm not something amazing here. And then I came back and did what any normal person would do. I went and spent a week doing a silent retreat at a monastery here in Aotearoa. Just to get to know that silence and to get to know that I'm okay whether I'm changing the world or not. So as a person of faith, there's these dual realities that I live with, that I am created in the image of God. So there is a sense where I am worth something, no matter what. That truth doesn't change no matter what. Yet on the other side, the world is broken. I recognize that the world is broken. And I recognize that actually there are elements where I'm broken, and that's okay. And I hold those two things together. Those two things just don't change no matter what. And being able to live with that reality and accept that reality, both of those realities, in tension and together, I think has made me just walk a little more gently in the world, a little more gently with myself, a little more gently with others, because I recognize those truths about everybody. And I don't feel the same stress or pressure on myself.
Because I guess you still feel this strong desire to change the world, you know.
Totally.
But I think what I'm hearing you saying is that, you thought you're the hero of the moment. Like we all, I'm not saying you personally, I think we all feel like we can save the world and we have this, where we're coming out, we see through our eyes perfectly and everyone else needs to see it our way. And that can be like with family, we can come home and feel like that. And it can feel broken a lot of the time. And partly what I'm hearing you say is that that's okay. And that's normal. Actually, it's probably every dad's experience. But that, and sort of holding that. But I don't know whether you can actually process that as a guy without processing it with someone, at the very least, talking to someone, which obviously you've been able to do. And in your case, you were talking about sitting there with God in the presence of God and actually telling him, and there was a bit of a healing in that moment. And a realization that it is what it is.
So in your home situation or your work situation, if it's not perfect, it is what it is. It just simply, this is what it is. And what it is okay. And then, with the reality that's in front of us, what do we do with it? And how do we act with integrity? And how do we put the best of who we are on the table and just be okay with whatever that is as well? I think through the entertainment industry, we're fed narratives and stories about what the perfect marriage should look like, for instance, or what it means to be an amazing dad who makes all the time in the world for his kids and responds in the perfect way with the perfect line every time, because that's what's scripted in the movies that we see. And so then, again, we're being set up to think it's always a failure. But what's in front of us is what it is, and it's okay.
Yeah.
And I have something to bring to the table here.
Yeah.
So it's just a question of, what do I have to bring to the table?
Yeah.
It's not going to change the world. It's not going to fix everything. But the best of what I have to bring to the table is okay, and it's good as well.
Yeah. So what do we do about finding people to talk to? Like, I think even the pandemic sort of unhelped this situation and made it worse, where we had mates that we stopped talking to for a while, because they disagreed with us, or we disagreed with them, or we thought they were stupid, or they thought we were dumb. And I experienced that myself, and I've had to be really intentional about re-engaging with people. But so what do we do? Like, if we haven't got, there'll be a bunch of guys out there that literally just got no one to talk to, or what do we do?
It's hard. I think first and foremost, it's worth acknowledging that it's hard, that it's not easy. Good relationships don't form magically. You've got to be intentional about them. You've got to decide that you want those sort of relationships, and then you've got to go out to work to make them happen. And it's hard because that comes with a vulnerability, because we don't know when we put our stuff on the table how someone else is going to react and what they might do with that information. So there's a sense where you've got to be okay with the vulnerability of that. And there's an element where you've got to be okay with the fact that you might get hurt, because in good relationships, in that opening up, there's a sense where you might get hurt. But if we don't do it, then the hurt is going to be even worse eventually, and it will come out in ways that aren't representative of the best of who we are. So workplaces can be good, depending on the type of workplace that you are. And you don't have to bare your whole soul to begin with. It might just be opening up at some point with a work colleague or someone that you connected to somewhere that you had a bad sleep the night before, and just watching how they react. You don't have to bear everything to begin with. Just starting with the smaller struggles that you might be going through. I felt quite tired for a number of weeks. That sort of thing. Or I was having a chat with my wife and my kids at home, and I reacted in a way that I'm not overly proud of. Just putting those smaller things on the table to begin with, and seeing what happens can be a great way just to get the ball rolling, and seeing who you feel like you can trust and who you can't.
Yeah, one thing I've done is, when I was quite a young man, was I found guys that were sort of ahead of me in their journey, parenting journey, man journey. Because, there's that, I don't know who it was that said, show me your 5 closest friends and I'll show you your future. And, so often we've got people in our lives that aren't ahead of us, that are maybe not good for us, that are struggling with the same stuff, and maybe they're not even dealing with it as good as we are. And I know for me that's been really important. And maybe sometimes as older men that have got an older family and they look like they're holding it together pretty well some of the time, or most of the time. I think those guys are guys that we need to seek out when life's feeling really hard.
So a question for you then, Mike, is how did you find those guys?
Well, for me, it was inside the church community, I think, predominantly.
Yeah, I think for those of us who are around church communities, I think even when it's not an overly healthy church, there's still community there, and there are still relationships that you can seek out. So for those of us who are in churches, I think we need to be aware of the fact that the community that we experience is not experienced by the majority of New Zealand anymore. The majority of Aotearoa New Zealand is relatively isolated. So for people who aren't in a church environment or a faith environment, I'd probably encourage them to think about what recreational activities they enjoy.
Yeah.
So if you enjoy tramping, there's probably a local tramping club.
Yeah.
If you're into fishing, hunting, anything, chess, there are clubs around. There are things that you can get involved in where you'll start to encounter people outside of your normal sphere. And in those spheres, when you start to venture out into some of those things and use the hobby as the catalyst, you might discover people who are, as you've said, further along in that journey and handling things in a way that you would like to handle things. And because us guys do well talking around activity, those hobbies and those things that we enjoy, great places to spark conversation and just to let conversation flow.
Yeah, and so, standing side by someone in a squash court, and just talking about the week, or hunting, or fishing, or whatever it is, those we need to take those moments to be more than just playing a game of squash and trying to win, although winning is very important, but also trying to sort of find those moments to talk about what's really going on. Yeah, that's really good. And it doesn't have to be inside of a church community, but we all need to be we need to be better at trying to find some communities that we're actually connecting with outside of it.
Yeah, it can even be just taking an opportunity with your literal neighbour to talk over the fence.
Yeah.
When we moved into the house that we're in at the moment, we did a little progressive dinner. So we connected with the house behind us, one of the houses beside us, and we said, hey, just to get to know each other, why don't we do a dinner one night? We'll have entree at your house. You can do the barbecue main at our house, and we'll do dessert at your house, which kind of just sparked off this fun relationship. And so now my neighbor over the fence, I chat with him about stuff. It's never anything really deep that I would bring up with my closest friends, but I was going for an MRI this morning and I had a chat with him over the fence. It blew my back out. I'm a bit nervous about the MRI. Turned out he has back issues as well, so talked through his journey and his experience. We're just chewing the fat over the fence. It can be as simple as that.
Yeah. And listen, let's address the CEOs, the business leaders, for a moment, because we spend so much time at work. These all of us dads were at work for at least 8 hours a day, some of us for 10 or 12 hours a day. And we have the opportunity to create environments where guys can feel safe at the very least, but also where maybe we can create environments where people can talk. I know for me, I've worked really intentionally on this. I was talking to one of my guys about his mental health just yesterday. In fact, he's going through some stuff, so I'm just very aware of it. That's something I couldn't have just started. You just can't walk up to people and go, hey, how's your mental health? There's a journey I've gone on with a handful of those guys. But what would you say that we can do as leaders to go on that journey, to start to sort of create environments where our guys can talk at work?
Yeah, I think it probably just begins with how we see them.
Yeah.
And not seeing them first and foremost as production units.
Wow.
That each person that we deal with is a human being. And that if we treat them as a human being, actually their productivity and loyalty to the company is probably going to grow anyway, but treating them as human beings. So when you ask how you're doing, letting them know over time that you're genuinely asking that question, setting up an environment where they feel like they can talk about how they're doing, and it's not going to affect their job or their work or their sense of how you view them. So I think it starts right there. It starts in how we're asking how you're doing. And there are just so practical tips on how to ask how you're doing.
Yes.
How you emphasize the words. Like, this is going to sound really lame, but how you emphasize the words and the tone that you bring to that question is going to completely change everything. So how you doing? Just sounds like g'day. Versus, so how you doing? And if they just go good, because that's a classic Kiwi answer, go, no, how are you really doing? And allowing the conversation to flow. I think it starts right there at its most simple, and not necessarily having those conversations in front of other people, because no one's going to offload in front of a whole team unless they really trust that team. So finding ways to have those conversations in a way that is non-threatening. So it's not the high pressure environment of doing it in a work review either. But finding ways to ask that question in ways that are non-threatening, relatively low-key, but genuinely express that you're interested, really interested in how they're doing. And remember things about them. Remember if they've got a partner, remembering their partner's name, remembering their children's name. If they throw little tidbits on the table about things that are going on for their wife or their children, try and remember those and then ask them about those later, because that shows that you're interested and you genuinely care.
Yeah. I've got an idea on this one that I've started doing this year, where I have a one-on-one sort of coffee meeting with I get my EA to organise it for me because I'm terrible at organising, and I'm also so busy. I'm like, oh damn it, I have to do that one-on-one. I don't really want to. She's like, no, you told me to tell you. You have to do it.
Yeah, good.
And so she chooses an employee for me, and I go and we go out and we have a coffee at a cafe, and I'm trying to find out the kids' names and their ages and find out what's going on at home, and just basically I don't talk about work.
Yeah, good.
Yeah, and it's a bit of a challenge for me because it's really our common ground is what we're doing together at work to make fireplaces in our case, and that's been really helpful for me and showing that I actually care about what's going on. I think oftentimes they're just sitting there going, "What the heck? We're just talking about this." I thought I was going to get fired, or I thought he was going to say this stuff, or ask me what's going on. So. Yeah, so it's been helpful for me, I think. It's been a mechanism for me to actually show some interest.
Yeah, and I think I genuinely believe you'll get better employees when you do it. And productivity is not the goal, but I think you'll get better productivity and loyalty out of your people when you take that much more human approach. I can't overstate that enough. When I talk to media people in my role as a media chaplain and from different organizations, how they feel like they're being treated as human beings within their organization totally affects everything else.
Wow.
So part of why I do chaplaincy is because I want every journalist to know that they are cared for as a human being. Because ultimately, I think we'll get better journalism if they all feel like they're valued as a human being.
Yeah.
When they don't, and when they're feeling like they're under the pump and they're not cared for, I think the level of journalism will slip. So ultimately, I want every single media organization in New Zealand to be treating all of their journalists, all of their personnel, first and foremost like human beings. That means that when they have a rough time, they know the company's not just going to brush it off and make them move on to the next story, that the company's going to take the opportunity to pause and work out what care looks like here. But you can't do that if you're not having those personal conversations. Yeah,
because, I was listening to a News Talk ZB host this week talk about the amount of organisations that are because there's a lack of staff, everyone's trying to employ people and they can't get enough good people, and so they're focusing on how, I don't know, a whole bunch of other stuff that's, what was the example? It was something like, couches in the smoker room or, perks, the perks they get at work. That's what they're focusing on instead of sort of those conversations or caring how people actually feel. They're trying to create environments that feel good because they get a free lunch or something.
Yeah. And that's easy. Yeah. Putting a couch in a smoker room is a tick the box and I can just move on. Whereas the more relational, deeper human stuff is ongoing and it's harder. It takes a little more skill and it takes a little more of stepping back from our natural impulses if our bottom line is the profit or the amount of product that we're pushing out, or in the case of media, the ratings. If those are the things that we're trying to drive because those are the things that are easier to measure, then those are the things that are easy to do. Whereas when it comes to looking after the well-being of a human being, a complex creature, it becomes a much more difficult task and it becomes more personal. Whereas it's easy just to go, the couch or we'll have a coffee machine in the smoker room, better quality coffee machine. People like that sort of stuff. But if it doesn't come along with a genuine expression of care and understanding that you're a valuable human being, people will just be cynical about that sort of thing.
Yeah. So there's a challenge, I think, for us leaders, is working out what it looks like for us to try to create environments that feel good, where people can turn up and the chaos of the life that they probably have at home is to not feel like it's too chaotic at work. At the very least, that's a good starting point, yeah. But then also having places that actually feel good and where they can maybe find people that are safe to talk to. And yeah, that's good. I like that. So that is the challenge, I think, for us guys, finding people to talk to. And we've talked about finding some older guys, finding some community around us. Any other thoughts, any other tips that we can, I mean, obviously there's counselling. That's the next level, is counselling and finding a good psychologist. I did that last year. I talked to someone around some issues I was feeling around my dad, who's not with us anymore. And I don't know that the counsellor gave me any. No, they did. There was one really interesting thing I'll feel free to talk about just now, where my greatest fear was not giving my kids enough time. I feel like a failure around the amount of time I give my kids, and I was talking about how I felt my dad never gave me enough time, and I didn't want to become like my dad. Now, my dad was great. If Mum's listening, or my siblings are listening, they'll be going, "What the hell? What are you talking about?" Like, come on. But that was my greatest fear, is that I wasn't giving my kids enough time. And she asked me some questions about how I could, do I have enough flexibility in my work life to actually, as a leader, can I modify my week to bring my kids into my week? And I actually worked out that I could, that on a Friday I could actually have a lunch date with one of my kids every week, and I made that change, and it's been great. Now, that doesn't apply to a lot of people. I know they don't have that kind of freedom, but for me, I just found that counselling experience quite helpful, because she asked some good questions, enabled me to sort of make some changes in my routine of my life to overcome my sense of failure in one area of my life. It was good.
Yeah, I really like that. Because it's a different perspective coming into what your head is doing as well. Our brains, I'd highly recommend Lance Burdett's book, Dark Side of the Brain.
Right.
Lance Burdett used to be a police negotiator. So if someone was standing on a bridge ready to jump, Lance would be the guy that would be called in to try and talk them down and to work it out. And he was doing that while he was going through his own stuff. But the brain is fascinating. Our brains, our whole human body is geared towards safety. So when we're geared towards recognizing danger and trying to find danger. So often when we're left to our own devices in our heads will spiral into chaos. So if we start with a really little issue, a lot of people will relate to this when they're awake at night and there's something going on in their head. It will hardly ever at night when you're lying awake work itself towards a good solution.
Yeah.
Usually our head in that situation will spiral. And it'll spiral and it'll get darker and darker and darker. Wow. Because our own brain is looking for the danger.
Wow.
It's working out where the danger is and working out whether it needs to fight, whether it needs fight or flight. Whereas when you sit down with someone, they're able to bring another perspective rather than just your own brain spiraling towards more and more chaos. So sitting down with a counselor in your instance allowed that worry about whether you're giving your kids enough time. It just brought a whole different perspective, where if you were lying awake at night worried about whether you're giving your kids enough time, I can almost guarantee that it's probably going to end up in a whole lot of self-condemnation. It's not going to offer any really good solutions, because your brain's just doing what your brain naturally does. So sitting down with someone else is really, really healthy.
Yeah. Man, so helpful. When I planned on, and when we talked about this interview, I think we had a completely different conversation planned. We haven't even gone there, which is great. I think this is so helpful. And just sort of in wrapping up, what would be, from today's conversation or anything else that's going on in your mind now, what would be the last thing that you'd like to leave dads with as a big thought for the day?
Yeah, I think it'd probably be that you're okay, that you're good, and tune into the narratives that you're being fed all the time. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. Once you see that you're being told all the time that you're both amazing, but your life isn't quite good enough, you don't quite measure up, so you need this thing and this thing. Once you see that in play, there comes a freedom to go, oh, okay, so these things aren't true. What is.
Yeah.
Life is not a Hollywood movie. You're okay. The situation is what it is. It's just a question of how we bring the best of who we are to the table, and that's the best of who we are, not the best, not the best as we would often measure it based on what everybody else tells us. It's just the best of who we are. Who is the best of me in this moment? What is the best that I can do? And when we stuff it up, it's not the end of the world. It's okay. It is what it is. We move on and we work on better.
Yeah.
Just relieve some of the pressure.
Yeah. That's awesome. Well, I really appreciate that. Thanks so much for your wisdom and for making the time. I know you're probably sitting there with a little bit of back pain going on at the moment.
Yeah, I've been moving around a little bit, and I keep driving my thumb into my back to just to relax it a little bit.
Oh, that's fantastic, mate. Well, thanks again. Awesome. And I hope to get you back on one day. Thanks, mate.
Pleasure, Mike. Thank you.